I want you to imagine, just for a second, that there is a machine.
Okay.
Like a massive ancient machine that has secretly been running human society since, well, since the absolute dawn of time.
That's a pretty terrifying image.
Right. But this isn't a machine made of gears and steam or, code and silicon. It's a psychological machine, a
Okay.
sociological one.
Oh, interesting.
And its fuel, it runs entirely on hidden guilt. And it basically disguises profound human violence as something necessary, something sacred.
Right. Yeah.
It uses blood to buy peace, but it dresses that transaction up so perfectly that the people operating the machine, they don't even realize what they're doing.
Which is, I mean, the most terrifying kind of sociological machine, right?
Yeah.
The ones that actually require the absolute blindness of their operators to even function.
Exactly.
Because the moment you see the gears turning, the machine just stops working.
And today, our mission for this deep dive is to basically drag those gears right into the light.
I love it. Let's do it.
We are going to look at how human violence gets disguised as holy ritual and how one specific historical moment was actually designed to break that illusion forever.
It's a huge topic.
It really is. And to do this, we are unpacking a 12-line modern poem by Cornell Overbeeke. It's called Vir Innocens, which translates to innocent man. It was written as a Good Friday poem.
Yeah.
But, we aren't just reading poetry today. We're actually pairing this poem with a really fascinating analytical essay that interprets these 12 lines through the philosophical lens of René Girard.
Oh, Girard. Yeah, he was a historian, a literary critic, and a philosopher who basically dedicated his entire career to uncovering this exact hidden machinery of violence we're talking about.
Right.
He coined a term for it, actually, called it the scapegoat mechanism.
Hmm.
And using his framework to analyze this specific poem, it really cracks open a terrifying window into human nature.
It really does. But I feel like before we even get to the first line of the poem, we kind of need to understand the fuel of this machine.
Yeah.
Because the essay keeps bringing up this Girardian concept of mimetic desire, which, sounds incredibly academic.
It does sound a bit dense, yeah.
Yeah, but the way it's described in our sources, it feels like something we all experience literally every single day. So can you sort of break down the mechanics of mimetic desire for us?
Absolutely. So we generally walk around believing our desires are authentic.
Right.
Like they're independent.
Right, like I want this coffee because I like coffee.
Exactly. We think we want a specific career or a certain type of car or a lifestyle because of our own unique internal preferences. But Girard basically argued that this is a total illusion.
A total illusion.
Yeah, totally. So we are fundamentally mimicking creatures. We basically look to other people to figure out what is actually worth wanting.
Wow.
So we don't just want what they have, we want it because they want it.
Okay, listening to you explain that, I'm immediately picturing like a room full of toddlers.
Oh, that's the perfect analogy.
Right, because you can have 100 toys scattered across the floor, completely ignored by everyone.
Just gathering dust.
Exactly. But the second one, toddler picks up, like a plastic fire truck. Suddenly, every other toddler in the room decides that specific fire truck is the most valuable object in the universe.
Yep, and they will literally fight over it.
Yes, even though they didn't care about it 10 seconds earlier.
It's so true.
Yeah.
And if you take that toddler dynamic and scale it up to adult society, right?
It gets a lot messier.
Way messier. Because instead of plastic fire trucks, the objects of desire are status, wealth, property, or even, moral superiority.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And as people mimic each other's desires, they inevitably start reaching for the exact same things. So the person you're copying actually becomes your obstacle.
Because there's only so much of that thing to go around.
Precisely. This transforms models into rivals.
Mm.
And that rivalry creates intense friction. The friction breeds envy, and then that envy just spreads through a community like a contagion.
Like a virus. So you basically end up with a society that's suffocating on its own contagious envy.
Exactly. Everyone is secretly competing. Everyone is anxious. The tension just becomes completely unbearable.
So how does a community not just rip itself to shreds at that point?
Well, they find a release valve.
Okay.
When that internal mimetic tension reaches a boiling point, the community subconsciously redirects all of that chaotic, inward-facing violence outward onto a single target.
The scapegoat.
Exactly. They select a scapegoat. And it's usually someone marginal, someone who stands out just enough to be noticeable, but who lacks the power to actually strike back.
Oh, man. That is dark.
It is, because the collective hatred of this one individual suddenly unites the fractured community. The war of all against all just magically transforms into all against one.
Wow. And that brings us perfectly to the actual text of the poem.
Right.
Because the essay points out that the opening lines plunge us straight into the perspective of that targeted scapegoat, right as the mob is closing in.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Let me just read these first two lines. The speaker says, I bear this wrath, though none is mine, this sacred scorn, your hate divine.
Okay, so the immediate assertion of innocence there is so crucial.
Though none is mine.
Yes. The speaker, who the essay aligns with the figure of Christ, by the way, is looking at the mob and declaring that. And in the ancient machinery of sacrifice, the victim's guilt is the absolute linchpin.
Because they have to deserve it, right?
They have to. The community has to believe the victim actually caused the plague or the famine or the social unrest. But the speaker here just flat out refuses to play that role.
They're naming their absolute innocence.
Exactly. They are naming the absolute innocence of the scapegoat.
They're like holding up a mirror and saying, I am carrying this anger, but I didn't generate it. You did.
Yes. And notice the brilliant juxtaposition in the very next phrase, your hate divine.
Oh, yeah.
That phrase completely exposes the central delusion that makes the scapegoat mechanism actually work. Well, the community is brimming with its own human hatred, right? But they project it upward. They sanctify it.
So they blame God.
They convince themselves that it's not their petty, jealous rage at work. It's God's rage. It is divine retribution.
Okay, I am struggling a bit with how deliberate this is, though. Like, are you saying these ancient communities were cynically lying?
That's the crazy part. No.
Did the people operating the machine know they were just murdering an innocent person to let off steam, and they just, like, made up the divine wrath part as a convenient PR spin?
No. The horrifying reality is that they genuinely believed it. The delusion is absolutely sincere.
Really?
Think about it. When a community is tearing itself apart with anxiety and they finally channel all that hatred onto one person and eliminate them, the psychological relief is profound.
Well, I guess that makes sense. The tension just goes away.
It dissipates instantly. The group feels this sudden, miraculous sense of peace and unity. And because that catharsis feels so incredibly powerful, they just assume it must be supernatural. They genuinely believe a deity demanded the blood and then rewarded them with peace for doing it.
Okay, that feeling of artificial unity, it totally reminds me of a toxic workplace dynamic.
Oh, definitely.
Let's say you have a highly dysfunctional office. The company is failing, everyone is terrified for their jobs, people are hoarding information, backstabbing each other.
The air is just thick with stress.
Exactly. So what happens, they subconsciously pick one person, maybe, like the new hire, who asks a few too many questions.
Yep. They make them the lightning rod.
They do. They start whispering about them, blaming them for blown deadlines, and finally they gang up and get the person fired.
And then what happens?
For a week or two after that, the office feels magically united. Everyone is chatting by the coffee machine again.
Suddenly everyone's friends.
Right. But to live with themselves, they can't admit they just ruined someone's livelihood just to soothe their own anxiety, so they create a myth.
Right. Oh, they were a terrible culture fit. The company's better off. And that corporate survival mechanism, that is the exact same psychological architecture as an ancient ritual sacrifice, just, with lower stakes.
That is wild to think about.
The group protects itself from its own monstrous reflection by blaming the victim.
But, okay, if they genuinely believe the victim is Bati and they genuinely feel better after getting rid of them, why do they need elaborate religious ceremonies?
That's a great question.
Because this actually brings us to the second stanza of the poem, which tackles this head-on.
Oh, right.
The speaker challenges the mob, saying, "No god demands my dying breath. It's not the Lord who thirsts for death, but you who hide your guilt in rites and call your envy holy light."
Such powerful lines.
So why the costumes and the altars and the holy rites? I mean, if the tension is gone, why not just bury the body and move on?
Well, because without the ritual, the violence would spread like a virus.
How do you mean?
If a community just murdered someone in the street, the victim's family would be socially obligated to seek revenge. And then the original murderers would retaliate. You would just spark an endless cycle of blood feuds that would eventually burn the entire society to the ground.
So the ritual kind of puts a lid on it.
Exactly. The only way to stop the cycle of violence is to make the violence unanimous and to categorize it as something entirely different from ordinary murder.
Oh, I see. So the ritual is essentially a way of laundering the brutality, like
Yeah.
money laundering, but for murder.
That is spot on. You
Yeah.
put dirty, chaotic mob violence into the ritual, and it comes out the other side as clean, sterile, holy justice.
That's chilling.
It is. The altar, the specific chants, the designated priests, all of these elements basically serve to distance the community from the raw reality of the killing.
The ritual says, we aren't murderers. We are obedient servants performing a sacred duty.
Precisely. And the poem captures this self-deception flawlessly with the line, "You who hide your guilt in rites."
Right.
The ceremony is literally a psychological shield.
I am so fascinated by the specific word the poet uses in the next line, though. And call your envy holy light.
Envy.
Yeah, envy. Not anger, not fear, but envy. We are right back to that mimetic desire you mentioned earlier.
We are. And envy is arguably the most corrosive and shameful of all human emotions.
Really? The
No.
most shameful?
Think about it. People will readily admit to being angry or afraid or even greedy sometimes.
That's true.
But almost no one will admit to being envious because envy implies inferiority.
Oh, man. You're right.
It means acknowledging that someone else has something you desperately want and feel you lack.
Nobody wants to admit that.
Nobody. Because envy is so deeply shameful, it requires the thickest disguise. So the mob takes their ugliest, most petty human impulse and dresses it up in the garments of divine righteousness.
They call it holy light.
Exactly.
So a system that provides psychological relief, prevents blood feuds, and disguises our worst traits as holiness. From a purely sociological standpoint, that is a devastatingly effective machine.
It really is.
I mean, you can see how civilizations could run on that loop for thousands of years. Build tension, pick a scapegoat, launder the murder through ritual, enjoy the peace.
And repeat.
Yeah.
Over and over.
So how does a machine that perfect ever actually break?
It breaks when the narrative is no longer controlled by the mob.
Okay, what does that look like?
Well, the essay makes a really profound distinction between ancient myth and the gospel through the Girardian lens.
Okay.
To understand how the machine breaks, we first have to understand how myth maintains it. Take the myth of Oedipus, for example.
Oh, yeah, Oedipus Rex.
Right. A terrible plague is ravaging the city of Thebes. The people are desperate. They consult an oracle who tells them the plague is happening because there's a terrible sinner hiding in their midst.
The classic setup. Find the source of the pollution and eliminate it.
Exactly. And they discover it's Oedipus. He has supposedly killed his father and married his mother.
Right.
He is cast out of the city, blinded and ruined, and the plague magically lifts. Thebes is saved. But here's the thing. When we read that myth, we are reading the story from the perspective of the persecutors.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
The myth is essentially the mob's PR campaign. It accepts the victim's guilt as absolute, unquestionable fact. The innocence of the victim is entirely erased from the historical record to protect the system.
So the story is written by the winners, and the winner is the scapegoat mechanism itself.
Beautifully said, yes.
Yeah.
But the gospel and the narrative captured in this poem does something incredibly radical.
What does it do?
It takes the exact same structural setup, a chaotic society, a restless mob, a designated victim, but it flips the camera angle.
It hands the microphone to the person on the altar.
Exactly.
Wow. Let's look at the lines from the poem that describe this reversal.
Yeah, please.
The speaker says, "And from my cross I will not curse, but break your wheel, rewrite your verse."
Right.
And then a few lines later, "So now the veil is torn in parts, and truth revealed to shattered hearts."
Okay, so refusing to curse is the first major step in breaking the wheel.
Why does that?
If the victim curses the mob, they are actively participating in the rivalry. They are mirroring the violence back at the crowd, which then basically justifies the crowd's hatred.
Oh, I see. It feeds the machine.
Exactly. But by refusing to curse and also refusing to confess to the false charges, the victim halts the momentum of the machine. The innocence of the victim remains totally visible. It rewrites the ancient verse.
It's kind of like, it's like sitting in the audience of a grand magic show.
Okay, I'm tracking.
For centuries, the audience has sat in the dark, gasping as the magician makes things disappear, totally believing they're witnessing real magic.
Right.
Because the scapegoat mechanism is the ultimate illusion. But then right in the middle of the performance, the magician grabs a camera and points it backstage.
Oh, wow. Yes.
They show you the hidden wires. They show you the trapdoors and the mirrors. And once you see the trick, once you understand how the illusion is actually manufactured, the magic is ruined.
You can't unsee it.
No,
Yeah.
You can never sit in that theater and fall for it the same way ever again.
That is a brilliant way to look at it. And the veil being torn in the palm is the perfect metaphor for exposing those trapdoors.
Because the veil hid the Holy of Holies, right?
Exactly. Historically, the veil in the ancient temple separated the ordinary world from the sacred mystery. Tearing it means there is nowhere left to hide the mechanics of the violence.
Wow. Right.
Society can no longer point to the sky and say, God demanded this blood, because the perfectly innocent victim had exposed that the bloodlust belonged entirely to the crowd.
The mob is forced to look at its own hands and realize they aren't holding divine instruments of justice.
Nope.
They're just holding murder weapons.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the really chilling aftermath of this revelation. The machine is broken, the illusion is shattered, but humanity is just left standing in the wreckage.
It's a tough spot to be in.
Let's read the final couplet of the poem, which the essay argues strikes at the very heart of Girard's philosophical insight.
Let's hear it.
Your peace is bought with blood and blame. First take my life, then praise my name.
Man, the paradox of the scapegoat is just fully realized in that single line. First take my life, then praise my name.
Yeah.
Girard actually observed this phenomenon across countless ancient cultures. The victim is violently killed because they are viewed as a despised criminal, a monster, a source of pollution.
Right.
But because their death miraculously restores peace to the chaotic community, the community retroactively credits the victim with that peace.
Wait. I want to make sure I'm grasping the psychological gymnastics here.
A lot, yeah.
They hate the person enough to brutally murder them.
Yes.
But because the murder temporarily relieves their mimetic anxiety, they look back at the dead body and basically decide that the victim must have actually been a god in disguise.
Yep, that is the darkest irony of human history.
That is insane.
The scapegoat goes from being the ultimate poison to the ultimate cure. They are worshipped precisely because they were murdered. But what this poem does is strip away that historical amnesia. It forces the operators of the machine to look at the sequence of events without the protective filter of myth.
It forces you to acknowledge that you bought this piece.
Exactly.
And the currency was the blood of an innocent person and the false blame you projected onto them.
It's devastating.
It really is. I keep thinking about the phrase shattered hearts from that previous stanza. Truth revealed to shattered hearts. It's such a painful image.
Yeah. Why do you think it breaks their hearts?
Well, when you realize that your peace is bought with blood and blame, it means your peace is entirely fraudulent.
Right.
It's just an artificial tranquility built on top of a corpse.
Beautifully put. The heart shatters because the moral foundation of society is completely pulled out from under it.
You can't unsee the wires.
Exactly. Once the veil is torn, ignorance is no longer an excuse. We can no longer comfortably participate in the mob.
We can no longer join the witch hunt or the public shaming and feel righteous about it.
Every time the crowd gathers to point the finger at a new scapegoat, that torn veil reminds us. We know how this trick works.
It leaves us with a really profound and terrible responsibility, doesn't it?
It does.
We can't just be blindly swept up in the catharsis of destroying an outcast and claim we're doing the universe a favor. We actually have to sit with our own anxiety and our own envy instead of just making someone else bleed for it.
And that's the whole point. The old machinery relied on our collective blindness.
Right.
By dragging the mechanics into the light, the poem and Girard's broader philosophy is essentially declaring that the ancient way of maintaining human peace is spiritually and morally bankrupt.
Man, what a journey. Let's take a breath and just recap this incredible deep dive for you, the listener.
Sounds good.
We started with a short 12-line poem about an ancient execution. But by unpacking it through the lens of René Girard, we uncovered a searing critique of human nature itself.
We really did.
We explored the concept of mimetic desire, how our contagious envy builds intolerable tension within a community.
And we examined how societies subconsciously use innocent scapegoats as a release valve for that tension.
Yeah.
And how they launder their ugly violence through rituals, calling their own toxic envy holy light just to live with themselves.
Right. And then we saw how that ancient spinning wheel of accusation was finally broken.
Yes.
The veil was torn, the wires of the magic trick were exposed by a victim whose innocence simply could not be erased by the mob's PR machine.
The myth was completely dismantled by the truth.
Leaving us with the uncomfortable knowledge that whenever we try to buy peace with blood and blame, we are actively participating in a lie.
Truly.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with today. Something to just chew on long after this deep dive is over.
Okay.
The poem clearly states that the veil has been torn, exposing this psychological machinery once and for all. But human habits, especially the ones that make us feel safe and unified, die incredibly hard.
They really do.
So as you look around the modern world today, in your workplace, in your local community, and especially in our digital public squares, where outrage is just the currency of the realm, where are we still secretly trying to run this broken machinery of sacrifice?
Wow.
Who are we turning into scapegoats right now to buy our own fragile momentary peace? And where are we still desperately, tragically calling our own envy holy light?